Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Rockshow, episode 217. How you doing, Rob?
Pretty good.
Okay, we're talking about somebody today I can't believe we haven't gotten to yet. We're talking about Van Morrison, the Irish rock legend.
Yeah.
Guy has had 2 Grammys, dozens of albums. He's actually a knight. He's a Sir Van Morrison. He was knighted by the British government a while back. Amazing career. Do you like Van Morrison? Or I know he's a little tough pill to swallow for some
He's
reason.
he's he's been good. Van Moore, he got a lot, Brown Eyed Girlfriends. He had a bunch of hits, man. Into the Mystic. That's a legendary.
Yeah,
He got so many hits, so many albums. So
right.
this should be an interesting show.
It is. I don't know why it slipped through my the cracks that I haven't done him sooner, but he's really such a legend. Um,
You know,
before we get, go ahead. I'm sorry.
when you sent me the thing at first, I thought we were going to Morrison. So I was so confused. Then I saw the Van Morrison.
You thought Jim Morrison?
No, I thought what's the band Morrissey? What's it called?
Oh, Morrissey, like the
Yeah.
Smiths? Oh,
Smith,
no. Yeah, I don't. I'm not a big Smiths fan.
I don't care for that shit.
Yeah, I'm not into them. But Van Morrison's great.
Yeah,
I've kind of like gotten into him a lot more as I'm older. There's just he's also one of these guys that a lot of musicians love him, so people like to cover his music. He's very influential for a lot of different reasons, which I'll get into. But before we get into it, we're going to talk about one of our sponsors today. That's Esoteric Academy.
yep,
For people who watch my Son of Sam podcast with Bryce on Esoteric Atlanta, this is her online school that you can go to esotericacademy.com, I believe. You're going to put all that in the show notes, right?
yeah.
And if you mention Rocker Mike 1969, you will get a discount on the price of admission for the online academy. What she does here is she teaches Eastern philosophies, yoga, stuff like that. I know a lot of people are very interested in that these days, and she's doing it all from like a healing and spiritual perspective. Bryce is very good at this. There's also a girl named Pauline that works in the school. I believe they both teach classes, and just check it out. Esoteric Academy. Make sure to mention Rocker Mike 1969, and you will get a discount off the admission price. All right, so let's talk about Van Morrison here. Um, Basically, he got his start with them and all that, the garage rock band known for Gloria and a bunch of
Yep.
other songs. And then, of course, like you mentioned, Brown Eyed Girl, that was like his first big hit. But the guy has an incredible catalog, and basically he's about to be 80 years old. His birthday is August 31st, 1945. He was born George Ivan Morrison. That's how you get the Van, Ivan,
Yeah.
his middle name. He was born in the Bloomfield area of Belfast, which is Northern Ireland, which is still under British control. It's that little region on the top of Ireland that's controlled by Britain to this day. He was the only child of George Morrison, who was a shipyard electrician, and Violet Morrison, okay, and she had a background in singing and tap dancing as a kid. Um, what's interesting, George Morrison was a shipyard electrician. That area of Ireland is known for shipbuilding. That's where the Titanic was built and stuff like that. So he came from kind of a blue collar background. Um, his father, even though he was an electrician, he was an avid music fan. He had probably what was the largest collection of records in Northern Ireland at the time when
Wow.
Van was growing up. So Van basically had this background of music and dance from his parents, and was shown all kinds of music, everything from Lead Belly to Ray Charles to Jelly Roll Morton to Solomon Burke, or like blues stuff like that, R&B stuff like that. And he's quoted as saying, if it wasn't for guys like Ray Charles and Solomon Burke, he wouldn't be where he is today. That was the inspiration for him to get into music. I also got to mention that his father did have, the largest record collection, but a lot of it he got on trips to Detroit that his father would make. So he
Wow.
got a lot of American recordings and brought them back, which is interesting. That was kind of rare at the time. It was very hard to get records in the UK or places like that in Europe. I remember watching a documentary one time on Lemmy from Motorhead, and he was about the same age as Van, and he used to have to like order records in a electronics store. They didn't even have record stores, and they would order the albums and they would come in and he would bring them home. So different times. Also, he was shown jazz stuff like Charlie Parker, folk music like Woody Guthrie, country music like Hank Williams and Jimmy Rogers. He was also influenced by Lonnie Donegan, who wrote the hit "Rock Island" line that Johnny Cash recorded at one point. That was part of what was known as the skiffle music scene. That was a big
Yeah.
thing in the UK and Ireland in the 50s. Um, Now, Morrison's father bought him his first acoustic guitar when he was 11 years old, and he learned to play just some simple chords from the Carter family style songbook, okay, which I believe was the Carter family, like June Carter, who would marry Johnny Cash later on, stuff like that. They had like a family songbook that you could learn their stuff.
Oh, shit.
In 1957, at the age of 12, Van Morrison formed his first band. It was a skiffle group called the Sputniks, named after the first satellite ever put in
Yeah.
space by the Russians. Okay. In 58, the band played at some of the local theaters, and Morrison would take the lead and contribute most of the singing and arranging of the songs. He was in some other short lived groups by the time he was 14. He formed one called the Midnight Special, which was another skiffle group, and he was known for playing school concerts at that age. When he first heard Jimmy Jeffries playing saxophone on the song "The Train and the River," he talked his father into buying him a tenor saxophone, and he started playing that as well. He could read lessons from jazz musician George Cassidy, who Morrison saw as a big inspiration on him, and they became friends. He also grew up with him on Hinford Street. They lived on the same block, that jazz musician. Playing saxophone, Morris joined a few other bands. Okay, and he did share the singing as well as playing the sax. Uh, he was in a band called Deanie Sands and the Javelins. He played guitar and he sang in that band. Uh, the lead vocalist was Deanie Sands, guitarist George Jones, and drummer and vocalist Roy Kane. Not that George Jones, that was an
Oh,
American.
okay.
I knew you were thinking that. Later, these four main musicians of the Javelins, with the addition of Wesley Black as pianist, became known as the Monarchs. Morrison attended Orangefield Boys Secondary School, leaving in July 1960 with no qualifications whatsoever. So he really wasn't big on school. But he was a member of the working class community and he was expected to get a regular full time job. So he did some apprentice work, which was kind of a common thing back then. And he settled into a job as a window cleaner. And there's a song later on that he would write called Cleaning Windows, which was kind of like alluding to those times.
Oh, well.
Okay. He had been developing his musical interests from an early age, obviously, and continued playing with the Monarchs in that lineup part time. The young Van Morrison also played with Harry Mack's show band, the Great Eight, and with his older workplace friend Geordie Sproul, whom he later named as one of his biggest influences. The show band thing we talked about, kind of like with Rory Gallagher as well. This was something that a lot of Irish bands did. They called themselves show bands, and they would play in Ireland, and then they would also go to England at certain times of the year when they couldn't play in Ireland due to like the Catholic Church stopping them from playing on holidays and Sundays and things like that.
Why were they doing that?
They were doing that because the Catholic Church had a lockdown on Ireland. Basically, if they couldn't have shows on Sundays and they couldn't certain holidays they couldn't because it was a Catholic country, so they controlled it. When that stuff was going on, they would just go to England and play over there.
Oh, okay.
You know. So At age 17, he toured Europe with the Monarchs for the first time, and they were actually calling themselves the International Monarchs at that point. They were referred to as an Irish show band. Van played saxophone, guitar, and harmonica. In addition to backup duty on bass and drums,
Wow.
they toured army bases, U.S. Army bases in Europe, and kind of like seedy little clubs that they would play in Scotland and England and Germany. Often they had to play 5 sets a night. Can you imagine?
That's
Right?
a lot.
Yeah. And in Germany, they recorded as the International Monarchs the song Boozoo Hully Gully, with the flip side was Twingy Baby, and that was under the name Georgie and the Monarchs. This was Van Morrison's very first recording, and it took place in November 1963. It was recorded in Cologne, Germany, and it kind of charted in Germany in the lower echelons of the charts. In November of '63, everybody would return to Belfast, and unfortunately, the Monarchs would disband. He would connect with Georgie Sproul again and played with him in what was called the Manhattan Show Band with guitarist Herbie Armstrong. When Armstrong auditioned to play with Brian Rossi and the Golden Eagles, later known as the Wheels, Morrison went along and was hired as their blues singer. So
Wow.
he's all over the place
Over
at a young age. Um, this would be the beginning of the roots of Them, the band Them. Um, that first broke Morrison on the international scene in April of 1964. It was when he responded to an advertisement for musicians to play at a new R&B club at the Maritime Hotel in College Square North, which is a region of Belfast. It was kind of a region frequented by sailors, a little seedy. Um, the new club that opened there, the Maritime Hotel, needed a band for its opening night. Morrison had left the Golden Eagles at that point, and he created a new band out of what was the Gamblers, an East Belfast group formed by Ronnie Millings and Billy Harrison and Alan Henderson in 1962. Morrison took the place of his friend Bill Dunn, who left the band months earlier to become a pastor. Eric Rickson, still a schoolboy, was the piano player and keyboardist. Morrison played sax and harmonica and shared vocals with Billy Harrison. They followed Eric Rickson's suggestion for a new name, and the Gamblers would morph into Them.
Them.
Their name taken from, guess what? The 1954 horror movie
Yeah, Them.
about the giant ants.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how they got their name. So the band would do R&B performances at the Maritime, and they started to attract attention. And they often didn't practice. It was kind of like very loose. Morrison would ad lib lyrics and stuff like that when he performed live. The band did covers. They covered also. They would cover old blues stuff and things. And then Morrison had some early songs written that was starting to get played in them. One was called "Could You Would You." That's a great tune. That would be recorded by them. And also he debuted Gloria. Okay, at that time at the Maritime Hotel, and sometimes depending on the mood, that song would go on for 20 minutes.
Gloria.
Yeah, yeah, it's a song you could definitely do like that.
Yeah.
So, often Morrison has said that Them lived and died on that stage at the Maritime Hotel. They played there so much. And also, it reflected the instability of the lineup. There would be some changes along the way, but Morrison and Henderson remained the only constants, and a less successful version of Them would soldier on after Morrison would leave the band. Okay, eventually that would happen. But before that, Dick Rowe of Decca Records became aware of the band's performances and signed them to a standard 2-year contract. In that period, they released 2 albums and 10 singles, with 2 more singles released after Morrison left the band. They had 3 charted hits: Baby Please Don't Go in '64, Here Comes the Night in '65, and Mystic Eyes in '65.
Yeah.
Here Comes the Night will be covered a few years later by Bowie on his Pinups album. He does a great version of that. But it was the B-side, Baby Please Don't Go, that the band that became the classic Gloria. Okay, it was actually a B-side, and people picked
Wow.
up on it. And it would be covered by everybody from The Doors to The Shadows of Night, which was a American garage rock band that actually had a hit with the song at the same time in America that them did.
Wow.
Okay, yeah, it's strange. You know, in those days we've talked about this. You could have
Yeah, it
regional,
happens a lot. Two
yeah,
songs, same song come out by two
same
different
time,
bands.
yeah. Also, Patti Smith would do a very different kind of version of it. Jimi Hendrix covered it. Now, building on the success of their singles in the United States and riding on the back of the Beatles and the Stones and all the other British invasion bands, they did a 2-month tour of America in May and June of 1966 that included a residency from May 30th to June 18th at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles. And the Doors were actually the supporting act, okay, on the last week of that residency.
That's impressive.
Jim Morrison was noted by John Densmore in his book Riders on the Storm that Van Morrison, no relation, was a huge influence on Jim. Okay, and he learned kind of like how to be a frontman based on what he saw Van Morrison do. Of course, he was influenced by a lot of things, but
Yeah,
it was that week opening for them that definitely influenced
did
the
it.
Doors, you know. Um, and on the final night, actually, the two Morrisons, Jim and Van, would jam together on Gloria on stage. Now,
Wow.
I would love to see that. I don't
That
know if
would have
there's
been
video of
awesome.
that anywhere. That would be awesome.
You know what? I was talking the other day to somebody. A lot of people give CBGB great credit, but the East Village had one of the best nightclubs, which I thought was superior than CBGB, around the Fillmore East. You ever look
Well,
at some of the people that played at Fillmore? It's
yeah.
like
Well,
legends.
The Fillmore East was earlier than CBGB's. Okay, by the time CB's opened, the Fillmore was gone. So
Yeah,
the CB's kind of filled the shoes of what was there before, and it was a different scene at that point. But you're right, the Fillmore East was huge.
yeah.
Okay,
I think we should do like a whole show about CBGB, the Fillmore East, and Max's Kansas City, like all together.
like
Cause
the
that
early clubs. That's a good
There's a
idea.
hit.
That's a
I
good idea.
told I told Billy Graham when he bought the Fillmore East, he called it the Rock and Roll Church, man, because
Yeah.
you had I think the
The Who played there,
the
Jefferson
Who,
Airplane.
Jimi Hendrix,
Right.
Eric Clapton, Cream. Like
Yep.
you look at the lineup. I told some kid the other day, I said the only reason people give even CBG any respect is because it lasted that long. But by the end of it, they had shitty bands in there. Nobody was going in there no
Yeah, well,
more.
they were kind of phoning it in at the end. You
Yeah,
know,
it
I
was
mean,
like
it was more of a tourist attraction the
yeah,
last 10 years or so than anything else. But even with that, you can't take it away from them what they did as a club. They kicked off a lot of bands that wouldn't have been able to play anywhere else, like the Ramones. But
yeah.
you're right, Fillmore East was the spot for a
These
short time. They weren't there that long. I don't even think they were there 5 years.
No, they were only there 3 years.
3 years,
It
yeah.
was like 69 to 71.
Yeah, yeah, that's 2 years. 2 years.
No,
You
it's
know,
68 to 71.
68 to 71. So yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to do a show on that. That's a good idea, Rob. I'll look into that.
Yeah. So
Now,
let's go back to Morrison
yeah,
playing
Jim
and
Morrison is playing now. They're on tour in the United States as them, okay. And towards the end of the tour, which was in June of '66, the band members became involved in an argument with their manager, Phil Solomon, who was part of Decca Records, over what else? Money.
it's
Okay.
always about money.
And then also they had a problem because their work visas were allowed to expire. And it meant the band returned from America a little disappointed in their trip. After two more concerts in Ireland, the band split up.
Yeah.
Okay. And Morrison concentrated on writing songs that would appear on his solo album, Astral Weeks. And the remnants of the band would reform in 1967 and actually relocate to America. But obviously, without Van Morrison, they were not the same group. Um, Bert Burns, who was them's producer and composer of their 1965 hit "Here Comes the Night," persuaded Van Morrison to return to New York to record a solo record for Burns' new label called Bang Records. Morrison would agree, okay, and he flew over to New York and signed a contract that he really didn't look at very closely. And during a 2-day recording session at the A&R Studios, starting the 28th of March of 1967, he recorded 8 songs originally intended to be used only as 4 singles. There was no discussion of an album yet. Instead, these songs were released as the album Blowing Your Mind. And that was all done right there. That was all done without Morrison's consultation. He said he only became aware of the album's release when a friend mentioned that he bought a copy. Morrison was unhappy with the album and said he had a different concept of what it was supposed to be. So that you know, you got to read your fucking contracts.
Yeah. But it kind of worked out for him, didn't it?
Well, it did, because Brown Eyed Girl was one of the songs on that album. Okay? And it was released as a single in mid-June of 67, all right, a year after them had left America, and it got to number 10 in the U.S. charts. I thought it was a little bit bigger when I was doing my research, but only did get to number 10, and it's still today his most played song on the radio.
That song, it's in more movies than anything.
I think so. I mean, he probably made a fortune just in that.
Yeah, just saying the show, but there's a bunch of songs, TV shows that they used to Brown Eyed Girlfriend.
Well, it's interesting because I have some statistics here. Now, the song spent 16 weeks in the charts, and as of 2015, okay, that downloads and airplay, okay, shows that it's the most popular song of the entire 1960s. And it sits at number 49 on VH1's list of 100 greatest rock songs.
Yeah,
and it sits at number 110 on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest songs of all time. And in January of 2007, Brown Eyed Girl was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame just as a song. Okay, that's how huge it is.
Every song, man.
Yeah. Now, following the death of Burns in 1967, Morrison became involved in a contract dispute with Burns' widow, who took control of that record company. Her name was Eileen Burns, and that prevented him from performing on stage or recording in the New York area. The song Big Time Operators, released in 1993, is thought to allude to his dealings with the personal and financial problems that he had at the time. He wrote a song many, many years later. He was kind of depressed. He fell into a depression. He couldn't book any shows. He regained his professional footing, though, in the few gigs that he could find, and started recording with Warner Brothers Records.
Yeah, because they bought out his contract.
They bought out the Bang contract, Bang Records, with a $20,000 cash transaction that took place in an abandoned warehouse on 9th Avenue in the city. Okay, that sounds a little shady. Might have been 20,000 and maybe something else, but a clause required Morrison to submit 36 original songs within a year to Burns' publishing company. He recorded them in one session on an out-of-tune guitar with lyrics about subjects including sandwiches and ringworm. Okay. Eileen Burns thought, he was giving it to the widow. So Eileen Burns thought the songs were nonsense and did not use them. The throwaway compositions became known as the revenge songs of Van Morrison and did not see official release until the 2017 compilation, the Authorized Bang Collection. I've actually heard some of these songs. They're funny. They are. Okay. Now, Astral Weeks, we're going to talk about now. 1968, one of the greatest records of all time. That's his first recorded album for Warner Brothers. And he had already performed some of the songs around the Boston area for different clubs he was playing at. It's a mystical song cycle, often considered to be his best work and one of the best albums of all time. Van has said that Astral Weeks, when it came out, he was starving to death. Literally, he was broke. It was released in 1968. The album originally received kind of an indifferent response from the public, but it eventually got a lot of critical acclaim, and it's now considered, one of the greatest.
One of the greatest.
Um, it's often described as hypnotic, meditative, and has a kind of a musical power behind it.
Yeah,
It's a strange record. It's interesting. Okay, it's a good listen. It's not boring or anything or out there too much, but it just has there's a mood that it creates. Now, it also has been compared to like French Impressionism or Celtic poetry. It has a little bit of all that. Um, Basically, it's Mojo Records in 1995 said it's one of the greatest albums, number two of the 100 best albums of all time. All right,
wow.
that's how important it is. Um, then we would get into his next album, which is called Moondance. Totally different kind of record. That came out in 1970, and that was his first $1 million selling album. And it reached number 29 on the Billboard charts. The style of Moondance was totally, there you go, totally in contrast to Astral Weeks. Um, Astral Weeks was a little bit of a sorry, not depressing, but a sorrowful kind of record. Uh, Moondance, however, is just very upbeat, optimistic, cheerful. It's not more of like it's more of a rock record than a folk record. Astral
Yeah,
is a little folkish, okay, and it's even got like an R&B style to it on some of it. So, the title track, although not released in the U.S. as a single in 1977, did get heavy FM radio play at the time. And FM radio at the time was known for not playing singles. They would play the album tracks and the deep cuts and stuff and the long versions of songs, album sides, things like that. It was very experimental FM when it came out. So yeah, that song was known but not released as a single until quite a few years later. Into the Mystic has also gained a wide following over the years. Come Running, which which reached the American top 40. It would rescue Van Morrison kind of like from obscurity at that
yeah,
point. Okay, but Moondance was both well received and favorably reviewed. Critics like Lester Bangs and Grail Marcus would write full page uh, reviews of this, totally saying it's fantastic. I know that Lester Bangs, we did a show years ago on him, but he was a huge Van Morrison fan.
yeah.
He
You
loved
love
this.
Van Morrison.
Yeah. Over the next few years, Van would release a succession of albums, starting with that second one in 1970, and then his band and the Street Choir had a freer, more relaxed sound than Moondance. That album, but it was not as big a hit, but it did have the big hit Domino on that album. Okay, his band and the Street Choir, that album. Do you have that? Yeah, that's it. That's it. In 71, he released another well received album called Tupelo Honey, and this had the single Wild Night, okay, which was known to be covered later on by John Mellencamp. All right. The title song has a notably country soul feel to it, and really the album kind of was a countryish album. And then there's this track called Moonshine Whiskey that ends that album that definitely is a country song.
Oh yeah,
Ted Templeman co-produced that record, okay, and right away it was known as a simple recording because there was no overdubbing on any of that on that album. Um, in 1972, there would be Saint Dominic's Preview, and that would reveal Morrison's break from like accessible style music and going back to more kind of like adventurous and meditative stuff that Astral Weeks was like. Okay, the combination of these kind of two styles of music, in other words, an accessible rock sound, though a little offbeat, and this kind of experimental sound that he had, it would kind of mix. And this is the album that had Jackie Wilson Said, which is one of my favorites from him. Okay. The track Redwood Tree would be on this album, St. Dominic's Preview. Okay, the album would reach that song "Redwood Tree" would reach the Hot 100 singles charts. Okay, there's a song called "Listen to the Lion," "Almost Independence Day." They couldn't be released as singles. These songs were over 10 minutes long, but FM radio did play them.
Wow.
Okay, yeah. So his next album in 1973 got kind of negative reviews, a little bit of mixed. It was called "Hard Nose the Highway." It had the song "Warm Love," which is considered a popular song by him, but otherwise the album was kind of like dismissed. And then in 1973, there was a Rolling Stone review of it. It was called "Psychologically Complex," musically somewhat uneven, and lyrically excellent, though. Okay, and I think that's something important. I think that Van Morrison, obviously, music wise, he's amazing. He's not
Yeah.
afraid to be experimental or do something simple, something accessible. But he's known for his lyrics, and I look at his stuff almost as poetry. Really, what he's saying.
Now that when he performing now, he doesn't even once he's on stage, they pretty much stop serving drinks.
Yes, well, he doesn't drink anymore. Yeah, that's something that he kind of pushes on his audience. But I think I don't know. It's just something that he demands when he performs.
But
Not
that,
an easy,
that's weird.
not an easy guy to work
That's
with.
weird because that's what makes the place money.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Now, during a 3-week vacation visit to Ireland in October of '73, Morrison wrote 7 of the songs that made up his next album called Vidon Fleece. Now, it attracted scant initial attention, but over the years, it's kind of grown as a popular record. It was kind of shrugged off. There was a couple of songs on there, one called "You Don't Pull No Punches," but "You Don't Push the River." That was the name of the song. And he was kind of like I mentioned poetry. He was influenced by poetry. Uh, William Blake was an influence, and you could hear it in some of the lyrics on this album. Morrison would then take another 3 years to release a follow-up record to this. After a decade without taking any time off, he said in an interview he needed to get away from music completely and ceased listening to it for several months. He was also suffering from writer's block at this point, okay, in 1974, 75. And, he was considering leaving the music business altogether.
Wow.
But there would be that an extended jam session would be released either under the title Mechanical Bliss or Naked in the Jungle or Stiff Upper Lip. This was just like a jam session that was going to be released as an album. It never happened. The next album that would come out would be in 1977 called A Period of Transition. And he collaborated with Dr. John, the amazing
Yeah.
New Orleans performer. And he had just appeared in the Last Waltz movie, okay, with Morrison in 1976, about the band. Okay,
Yeah.
the album received period of transition a mild critical reception and marked the beginning of a very prolific period of song making. Very interesting contradiction there. I mean, it didn't do well critically, but it also ushered in a prolific period where he was writing and releasing a lot. The next album would be called Wavelength, released in the following year, and it became at that time the fastest selling album of his career, and soon would go gold. The title track Wavelength became a modest hit, peaking at number 42. There's synthesizers and keyboards on this album, and he actually uses the sounds of shortwave radio and stuff that he had listened to as a youth. The opening track called Kingdom Hall, and it was the name given by Jehovah's Witnesses to their places of worship. It evoked Morrison's childhood experiences of that religion with his mother. His mother was at one point a Jehovah's Witness.
Oh wow.
And yeah, and it foretold kind of religious themes that would come up in his next album called Into the Music. Now, considered by AllMusic.com as the definitive post classic era Van Morrison, Into the Music was released in the last year of the 1970s. Songs on this album for the first time alluded to the healing power of music, which became an abiding interest of Van Morrison's. A song called Bright Side of the Road was a joyful, uplifting song that is featured on the soundtrack of the movie Michael, John Travolta film. Remember that movie?
Yeah.
Now,
Wasn't that song also in Mighty Python? Get on the right, the Life of Brian.
no, that's a different song. That's like a it's got a similar title, but that's
Yeah,
like a joke. Yeah, Get on the Right Side. That's not the same song. That's funny. Get on the right side of life or whatever.
yeah,
Whatever
get on the right side of life.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So with his next album, the 1980s found Morrison following his musical muse into uncharted territory, and sometimes the reviews were not good. In February of 1980, Morrison and a group of musicians traveled to Super Bear, which is a studio in the French Alps, to record what is considered to be the most controversial album in his discography. Later, Morrison admitted his original concept was even more esoteric than what came out. The album, called Common One, consisted of 6 words. Can you feel the silence? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It consisted of 6 songs, excuse me. The longest, Summertime in England, which lasted 15 and a half minutes and ended with the words, Can you feel the silence? Okay. New Musical Express magazine's Paul DeNoia called the album colossally smug, cosmically dull, interminable, vacuous, and drearily egotistical stab at spirituality.
Wow.
Uh, That's not good. He said he's acting the part of this mystical poet that he thinks he's supposed to be, but it doesn't work.
Oh
Uh,
man.
he says that it was never meant. Van Morrison says it was never meant to be a commercial record. Okay, but biographer of Van's, Clinton Halen, concludes he would not attempt anything so ambitious again. Okay, but later on, critics kind of reassessed the album
Yeah.
more favorably with the success of Summertime in England, which was like an FM hit,
Yeah.
15 minutes long. Lester Bangs would write in 1982, Van was making holy music even though he thought he was. And us rock critics had made our usual mistake of paying too much attention to the lyrics. Um, Morrison's next album, released in 1982, was called Beautiful Vision, and it had him returning once again to the music of his Northern Irish roots. Well received by the critics and public, it produced a minor UK single called Cleaning Windows. That was a throwback to his old job.
Oh yeah.
And several other songs on the album, Van Loo's Stairway, She Gives Me Religion, and there's an instrumental called Scandinavia. It shows the presence of a new personal muse in his life, which is a Danish public relations agent who would share Morrison's spiritual interests and serve as a steadying influence on him throughout most of the 1980s.
Wow.
Scandinavia, with Morrison on piano, was nominated in the Best Rock Instrumental Performance for the 25th Annual Grammy Awards. Much of the music Morrison would release throughout the 80s continued to focus on the themes of spirituality and faith. There was one called Inarticulate Speech of the Heart. He would credit Scientology on this record. He was getting interested in that. A Sense of Wonder, which is Morrison's 1985 album, okay, would kind of like dig deep into contemplation and meditation. Uh, there was a single called Tore Down a la Rimbaud, which was a reference to the poet Rimbaud. Um, Morrison's 86 release called No Guru, No Method, No Teacher was said to contain a genuine holiness and musical freshness that needs to be set in the context to understand.
Wow.
People kind of, critics were comparing this particular record to Astral Weeks.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, he would kind of go through a period now where his music was kind of less edgy and more adult contemporary. The well received 1987 album, Poetic Champions Compose, considered to be one of his recording highlights of the 80s. There was a romantic ballad from this album called Someone Like You, and that was featured in several movies, including 1995's French Kiss, and in 2001, the movies Someone Like You and Bridget Jones's Diary. Yes.
Yeah, his movie, his a lot of his songs do make the movies. A
Yeah.
lot of Fast Forward says a
This
lot
is
of
his songs are moody, kind of, and they fit probably certain moments in movies that would work. One of my favorite records of his came out in 1988. It's called Irish Heartbeat, and it's a collection of traditional Irish folk songs recorded with the Irish band the Chieftains.
okay.
Okay, and that got to number 18 in the UK album charts. The title song Irish Heartbeat was originally recorded on his 1983 album Inarticulate Speech of the Heart. Okay, um, he would kind of Irish it up a little bit more with the Chieftains. Added a little Jameson to the song. Um, the 1989 album Avalon Sunset featured the hit duet with the famous Cliff Richard called Whenever God Shines His Light. There was a ballad called Have I Told You Lately, and that reached number 13 on the UK charts.
Number
Um,
13. That's not bad.
yeah. The early to mid 90s were commercially successful for Morrison based on three albums reaching the top five in the UK. He also had a bunch of sold out concerts in the 90s and was a little bit more visible publicly. He was always known as a little bit of a recluse,
Yeah.
okay, but he was seen, more visibly in this period. And it also marked a decline in the critical reception to his work. The decade began with the release of The Best of Van Morrison, compiled by himself. Okay, put it together. The album focused on his hit singles and became a multi platinum success,
Yeah.
remaining a year and a half on the UK charts. All Music determined it to be far and away the best selling album of his career. In 1991, he wrote and produced four songs for the famous Tom Jones, released on the album Carrying a Torch, and
Okay.
performed a duet with Bob Dylan on a BBC Arena special.
Wow.
There was also a great live album called A Night in San Francisco and released in 1994. It was a double live record. That got favorable reviews and some commercial success, reaching number 8 in the UK. 1995's Days Like This also had large sales. Uh, Critics didn't like it too much, but sold well. And there was a bunch of side projects going on at this time, including some live jazz recordings. Albums called How Long Has This Been Going On? Tell Me Something, the songs of Mose Allison, and 2000's The Skiffle Sessions, live in Belfast 1998. So he was kind of like, like reimagining his past with jazz influences.
But he was all over the place.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
Stuff
yeah.
was
Right.
good. Like he was all
Very
over
prolific. Very
jazz,
prolific.
doing this, doing that. It's like, holy shit. Like, how many careers did this guy have?
I know, it's
The
amazing.
music.
Yep. In 1997, he would release the album The Healing Game, and critic Grail Marcus praised the musical complexity of the album by saying it carries the listener into a musical home so perfect and complete, he or she might have forgotten that music could call up such a place and then populate it with people, acts, wishes, and fears. Nice review. The following year, Morrison finally released some of his previously unissued studio recordings on a 2-disc set called The Philosopher's Stone.
Hey, Mike, have you watched the movie The Sinner?
The Sinner?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Michael B. Jordan, and it's pretty
Oh,
freaking good.
yeah.
About these twins, and they open like a club, like like one of those black clubs that we call back in the days.
Yeah.
And the one guy sings, and it starts doing this crazy thing. His voice, you got to check it out. It's on HBO Max right now. On Max,
Okay.
have that on HBO. Just check it out. It's interesting.
Cool. So, getting back to Van, his 1999 release called Back on Top would be his highest charting album since 1978's Wavelength.
Yeah.
Uh, Starting in 2000, he would begin to record and tour more, often performing 2 or 3 times in a week. Okay, now he's in his 50s at this point. He would form his own independent label called Exile Productions Limited, which enabled him to maintain full production control of each album he records,
Wow.
which he then delivers as a finished product to the recording label that he chooses for marketing and distribution. So he kind of like signed to his own label and then distributed to whatever label he wants to deal with. It's good creative control.
Pretty much.
Uh, in 2001, 9 months into a tour with Linda Gale Lewis, promoting their collaboration "You Win Again." Linda Gale Lewis is the sister of Jerry Lee.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I met her about 3 years ago over at a little club called Buckley's in Valley Stream, Long Island, and she did a whole set of Jerry Lee Lewis songs. She's almost as good as her brother.
Oh, I remember you saying you did that.
Yeah, I took a picture with it too. You might have seen the picture. So, uh, unfortunately, even though they would do this collaboration on the song "You Win Again," Lewis would leave the tour, later filing claims against Morrison for unfair dismissal and sexual discrimination. Both claims were later withdrawn, and Van Morrison basically accepted a full apology and comprehensive retraction, which represents a complete vindication of his stance from the outset. Miss Lewis has given a full and categorical apology. So whatever it is, they made up over that. Okay. The album Down the Road, released in May of 2002, received a good critical reception, and that was another high charting album. Okay. It had a nostalgic tone with 15 tracks representing the various musical genres Morrison had covered before: R&B, country, folk music, and one of the tracks was written as a tribute to his late father, George, who had played a pivotal role early on in his career. Um, Morrison's 2005 album, Magic Time, debuted at number 25 on the U.S. Billboard 200 charts. And basically, it's been 40 years at that point in 2005 that he was on the scene. He would do a charity album for the Hurricane Relief Come Together Now. That was for I believe Hurricane Katrina and Hurricane Rita. That was for. And then there would be another 2007 record, The Best of Van Morrison Volume 3. He would headline the International Celtic Music Festival. Okay. And he released an album with a country music theme in 2006 called Pay the Devil. And he appeared at Ryman Auditorium, and the tickets sold out immediately. Okay. He did very well on that tour. The album Pay the Devil debuted at number 26 on the Billboard Top 200 and peaked at number 7 on Top Country Albums. So he's crossing over.
Oh, over. Jazz, regular popular music, country, everything.
Yep. In September of 2006, he played the Austin City Limits Musical Festival. And then in November of 2006, there was a limited edition album called Live at Austin City Limits Festival. And that came out on his label, Exile Productions. There would be a later release of a CD/DVD of Pay the Devil in the summer of 2006, combining tracks on the album with some live tracks at Austin. There would be another commercial DVD called Live at Montreux, 1980/1974, taken from two different performances that he did at Montreux. There would be a new double CD compilation album called The Best of Van Morrison Volume 3, released in 2007. 31 tracks, some of which were previously unreleased.
Wow.
Yeah. They would also select tracks from the 1993 album Too Long in Exile that probably were not as well known. Those were included. And on September 3rd, 2007, Morrison's complete catalog of albums from 1971 to 2002 were put on iTunes.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
They were made downloadable, right?
Yeah. You know what the funny thing about Van Morrison? He's like the Irish Johnny Cash.
Kind of.
No, they
That's
almost
a good analogy. That's a good analogy.
Cash did a lot of those Christian records. After a while, he became very religious.
See, well, It's interesting with Johnny Cash. I'm a big fan. I know a lot about him. He was
Yeah,
always religious.
yeah,
Okay, in the 50s, he really wanted to do gospel stuff, but the
yeah,
label wouldn't let him. Uh, it wasn't until that he actually, in the 60s, got fame and he had a little leverage that he was
yes,
able to go out and include gospel stuff. But you're right, and there's no doubt that Morrison followed in Cash's footsteps, no
yeah.
doubt.
Because he also did, but he was more like a spiritual guy, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Van Morrison has said that he's against religion, that he's a spiritual person. He feels
Yeah, he's a
religion
spiritual. Yeah,
is just a man-made thing, but he's a spiritual person, and
yeah,
he's delved in different spiritualities. So he's a very interesting guy.
yeah.
But in October of 2007, there would be a greatest hits called "Still on Top" that would come out in the UK on the Polydor label. He was starting to do well with these greatest hits coming out. Um, his 33rd studio album called "Keep It Simple" was released on March 17th, 2008 in the UK, and then released on his Exile label in the US and Canada in April of 2008. It comprised 11 self penned tracks. Morrison promoted the album with a short US tour, including an appearance at the South by Southwest Music Conference.
That's
And
a
a
huge.
and a UK concert broadcast on BBC Radio 2 in the first week of release. Keep It Simple debuted on the Billboard Top 200 charts at number 10. Morrison's first top 10 charting in the US. I saw him on that tour. That's the only time I ever saw him. Uh, I don't, it's funny you mentioned about the alcohol. I don't think it was in effect at that point.
Yeah,
I'm
I
not
think
sure if
he
that
said,
rule.
I know somebody went and that's all the bitch about.
Mhm. Now, he would release two albums in the first half of the 2010 to 2020 decade, followed by a further six in just 5 years. His productivity increasing noticeably as he turned 70 years old. Born to Sing, No Plan B was released on the 2nd of October 2012 on Blue Note Records. The album was recorded in Belfast, which is Morrison's birthplace and hometown. The first single from this album, Open the Door to Your Heart, was released on August 24th, 2012, and a selection of Morrison's lyrics, Lit Up Inside, was published by City Lights Books in the US and Faber in the UK. The book was released on October 2nd, 2014, and an evening of words and music commenced at the Lyric Theatre, London, on the 17th of November 2014 to mark its launch. Morrison himself selected his best and most iconic lyrics from a catalog of 50 years of writing. Um, Through the rest of the decade, he would have quite a few albums. One called "Keep Me Singing," and of course there was 8 dates in October of 2016 through December of 2016 in London called the O2 Arena. Okay, and this stuff would be released also. Morrison's album "Roll with the Punches" was released on the 22nd of September 2017. That July, he and Universal Music Group were sued by former professional wrestler Billy Two Rivers for using his likeness on its cover and promotional material without his permission. Do you know who that guy is? You're a big wrestling guy,
Yeah, I
Billy
don't
Two
know
Rivers.
that is really two rivers.
Yeah, apparently they used something that was like his likeness.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's funny.
Yeah, they did settle this out of court by August of 2014. He would release in 2017 his 38th studio album called Versatile, which features covers of 9 classic jazz standards and 7 original songs, including his arrangement of the traditional Sky Boat song. He quickly followed up with his 39th studio album, You're Driving Me Crazy, released in April of 2018. And that features a collaboration with Joey DeFrancisco on a mixture of blues and jazz classics that include 8 Morrison originals from his back catalog. So they would kind of be reworking some older songs. His 40th studio album came out in October of 2018 called The Prophet Speaks. And then a year later, in November 2019, he released his 41st studio album called Three Chords and the Truth. On the 5th of March of 2020, Faber and Faber published Keep Her Lit, which was a second volume of lyrics that came out, second to accompany that first one. It features a foreword in the book by fellow poet Paul Muldoon and comprehends 120 songs from across Van Morrison's career. In November 2020, Morrison and Eric Clapton collaborated on a single called Stand and Deliver, whose profits from sales will be donated to Morrison's Lockdown Financial Hardship Fund. Okay, now you might have, in recent years, he's kind of stepped into some controversy, okay, related to the coronavirus and the corona pandemic. I don't know if you heard about this. It was going on during the pandemic. He was speaking out against, social distancing and the canceling of live events. He was talking about fighting the pseudoscience. Obviously, he was 1,000% right.
Yeah.
But in 2020, these things were controversial and would get your ass canceled. And of course, there was a lot of fans of certain mindsets that kind of turned on him with this. Now, he had something called the Van Morrison's Lockdown Financial Hardship Fund, which was basically a charity to help people affected by lockdowns. Okay. He was very anti-lockdown. He didn't believe in what he was hearing about the coronavirus, and he spoke about it. And it took a lot of balls. He was a guy that, I guess he might have been a little past any kind of real damage. He was probably very wealthy by that point, I'm sure. But at the same time, he was speaking out when a lot of people were afraid to do that. So I remember when that was happening. If you heard about a Van Morrison show coming, right after, even after the pandemic going into 2021, you would always hear about, oh yeah, but he won't get vaxxed, or he was against the agenda, and I was turned off by that when people would say that. It's just his opinion. He has a right to it, but people actually kind of, boycotted him a little bit because of that. I don't think he suffered, and I don't think he gave a shit. In 2023, though, he would return, and he would make another skiffle record called Moving On Skiffle, and an album called Accentuate the Positive. This was something, he'd done skiffle before, but he's gone back and forth to it. He would do an instrumental called Beyond Words, and then there was also Live at Orangefeld in 2024. Van Morrison songs were used extensively in Kenneth Branagh's Oscar-winning 2021 film called Belfast, and he received his first nomination for the Academy Award for Best Original Song for the song Down to Joy, which is in that film. Okay. Several tracks were also featured in the movie Cherry, released the same year. Down to Joy would not be released on a Van Morrison album until 2025, when it became the lead single from Remembering Now, which is his first album of original material since 2022. So that's where we're on now in 2025. He released that album called Remembering Now. And that was getting some radio play, I believe, in the recent months on Little Steven's Underground Garage channel. I heard some recent Van Morrison stuff. So, but he's out there. He's turning 80 at the end of August.
Wow.
And everybody, if he's one of these guys that, if you're a fan of music, of rock and roll, and the whole genre and important influences, check out Van Morrison. I mean, what an amazing career, I think. I'm glad we did this show.
Yeah, it's a very good show. Very informative. A lot of history.
Yep, I tried to keep it under an hour. I think we just hit it.
Yeah,
but
and I
could have talked easily for another half hour.
I also need to go because I got a schedule. I tell you that I got to be at Grand Central by 1:10. So.
Oh, you'll make it. You'll make it.
Remember,
So we'll talk soon.
Yeah.
And remember, everybody, what do we say?
Don't get drunk.
We get lumped up.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care, people.